Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I can say good afternoon. It is afternoon. We pledged to begin at 12:15, and we are going to do so. Those of you outside, if you'd like to try to gather under the tent, we think there's room. Ralph would appreciate everybody getting under the same tent with him. So welcome, and thank you for joining us on this most special occasion. And profound thanks to the many sponsors and individual donors who made this possible, as we recognize Ralph Baer, a true pioneer and creator of a technology that has changed the world in which we live. My name is John Clayton. I'm the Executive Director of the Manchester Historic Association and Millyard Museum, and we at the MHA were proud to serve as the fiscal agent for this remarkable community-based grassroots initiative that demonstrates the ways in which the Arms Park and Riverwalk can be utilized to bring a greater sense of vitality to Manchester. In fact, it was just last fall that the volunteer civic group Manchester Connects installed this beautiful park and patio furniture here, including picnic tables, to make the Riverwalk a real gathering place here in Manchester. A moment of recognition for the very first donor to this cause. Nearly 4 years ago, I was sitting on the deck in my house, and I heard a knock on the breezeway door. I turned to find my wife's uncle, her godfather, Bob Martell. Bob joined me on the deck and asked how my new job was going, and I brightened when I realized that Bob had worked very closely with Ralph Baer at Sanders Associates. And so I told him all about this cockamamie plan to build a statue in the Millyard that would honor Ralph. Bob smiled at the thought. He doesn't say much. The very next day, he pulled into my driveway and handed me 5 crisp $100 bills and said, "Something to get you started." You got to start it, Uncle Bob. Moose. And promise me the proof of your efforts are hidden behind this box, which will be moving shortly. Personally, I came to know Ralph Baer through my work with New Hampshire Union Leader and New Hampshire Public Television, but I'll leave it to our other speakers, the friends, colleagues, and family members, to tell Ralph's remarkable story, that of a German immigrant who fled Nazi oppression, fought with the American military intelligence during World War II, found his calling in the field of television engineering, and came to find a home at Sanders Associates in Nashville. But for our purposes here today, Manchester was his home for more than 60 years. So please join me in welcoming the mayor of the community that Ralph called home for so many years. Ladies and gentlemen, Mayor Joyce Craig.
Hello. It gives me such great pleasure to welcome everyone to Baer Square. This is a It's such a wonderful day in Manchester to be honoring Ralph Baer, the father of video games. Such an important part of Manchester, and now we have been able to pay tribute to him and have a bench here in his honor. I do want to also mention a few things and give tremendous thanks to Ralph's son, Mark Baer, who's here today. If you could, where are you? Yes, Mark. Also Liz and Jeremy Hitchcock and John Clayton, because without their drive and determination, this would not be happening today. So thank you very, very much. But as John mentioned, this was a true grassroots effort, and these individuals really brought the community on board and involved in this. And as mayor, I'm so proud of their efforts, and I thank all of you for being here today to celebrate with us.
Thank you, Mayor Craig. It has been said that genius cannot exist in a vacuum. It needs a home, a place that can encourage and nurture its growth and expression. Ralph Baer found that home at Sanders Associates, where his genius was able to reach its fullest potential. Over time, Sanders Associates has become a subsidiary of BAE Systems, and what better way for BAE to punctuate its imminent move to the Queen City and to demonstrate its commitment to this community than to offer such generous financial support for the Ralph Baer Bench Project as a platinum sponsor. This plaza represents the nexus of history and the future of technology in the Millyard, and I ask you to join me in welcoming the Director of Empower Innovation from BAE Systems, Mr. John Kelly.
Thank you, John. Thank you for the introduction. I'd like to thank Mayor Craig, the Baer family, and the Manchester Historic Association. I'm excited to be here today in the great city of Manchester to celebrate one of BAE Systems' own employees, Ralph Baer. At BAE Systems, innovation is at the heart of our culture. We operate with the belief that the ingenuity and creativity can be sparked in any employee at any given time. Ralph is a great example of that. He joined then Sanders Associates, now BAE Systems, in 1956 and remained a loyal employee until his retirement in 1987. It was during this time at our office on Canal Street in Nashua that he and a dedicated team of engineers began to investigate how to play video games on a television. Little did anyone know that this invention would help pave the way for the multi-billion-dollar gaming industry that we see today. With his remarkable inventive spirit and disregard for the impossible, Ralph is a role model for our employees. Stories like Ralph's inspire our people to pursue the things that they are passionate about, even if those ideas and concepts only exist in their imaginations. Ralph has truly influenced millions of people through his work. We are proud that the Brown Box was developed within the walls of our Canal Street campus, and know that the many employees look to Ralph as an example of what can be done when creative ideas are explored, supported, and nurtured. As you may know, we have a new facility here in Manchester that will eventually staff up to 800 employees. And I'm excited that when those employees, or any of our other 6,000 employees in the Granite State, come here to Arms Park, they can see the statue of Ralph and be inspired by his ability to make the impossible possible. On behalf of the grateful BAE Systems, we thank you for being included in this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Our other platinum sponsor for the Ralph Baer Bench Project is operating under a pseudonym today, that of the Orbit Group. But those of us in the know that that means Elizabeth and Jeremy Hitchcock. To say that this project would not have been completed without their involvement is a gross understatement, and their support goes far beyond the financial. Their suggestions and encouragement were invaluable. So was that private jet, which flew Ralph from California to Manchester. But so too were the many people they brought and made available to this project. There were many, but I will single out two here today. Kate Aiken, who managed to keep this project moving forward even while she was a full-time student at the University of New Hampshire. Thank you, Kate. And then there's Amy Chom. Anybody remember what they said about Mussolini? He could make the trains run on time. Amy Chom can make the trains run on time. Not to mention Mark Baer. She made him run on time. And me, she made me run on time. And right now she's trying to figure out how to make it stop raining. So thank you, Amy. And without further ado, from the Orbit Group, please welcome Elizabeth Hitchcock.
Hi all, thanks for coming today. John stole some of my thunder because I was going to say we couldn't have done this without the amazing team we get to work with every day at Orbit Group. Most specifically Amy Chom and Kate Aiken. I also want to take a moment to talk about community, and Manchester is one of the greatest communities I've ever lived in, but what really makes it special are all of the innovators, creators, and entrepreneurs that live in this city with us. Of course, I love this project personally because it's the coming together of both art, history, and also technology, which is the new platform that our city is growing on. So thank you very much for being here today.
Many thanks, Elizabeth. One of the motivating factors behind the creation of this monument here in Ralph Baer's adopted home was the way in which he's recognized in other parts of America and in fact the world. As proof, our next speaker is from the Strong National Museum of Play in Rochester, New York. He is the director of the International Center for the History of Electronic Games, and his name is John Paul Dyson. JP?
Thanks, John. You know, it's an honor to be here, both as someone who had the privilege of being a friend of Ralph over the last decade of his life and really learn from him. And as I was driving here, I was thinking, first of all, it's so appropriate that it's right here in the shadow of the Emskeg Mills. The Industrial Revolution transformed the way we live. And at the Strong, we started collecting video games because we realized they were transforming the way we play, the way we learn, the way we relate to one another in a massive way. And who better to honor for that in this area than Ralph? He really was a truly amazing person, as all of you who knew him knew well. And the second thing I was thinking about as I drove up here from Rochester was what made Ralph so special. And I was thinking there are three things that really, to me, stood out, and probably everyone has a different perspective. But first of all, obviously, his creativity was one thing. Anyone who knew him, his mind was always turning. Even a month or so before he passed away, I remember him showing the pizza game. Pizza toy he was working on, spinning around, and it was incredible. He had this gift for finding new ways of looking at things. But that was matched by a second thing that I think was really important, and that was his tenacity. We have his records, his papers, and Ralph stuck at something. He worked at it and worked at it and worked at it. He often come back to the same idea and find new applications. And that was really key, I think, to his success. And the third thing is something that, again, also I think we can learn from today is, and I couldn't find the right word for it, but the best I could think of was camaraderie, because it ended with an E sound, too. But he had this gift of working with other people. When you look at his career, he worked with different people over his lifetime, people who are here today, like Bob Pelovitz or Phil Baines, and had this gift to bring the best out of people, whether they were colleagues who he's working on inventions with, whether it was friends, he had a great gift for making friends, or even with folks like us at museums, like me and I know folks from the Smithsonian. So it really is an honor to be here and to see Ralph honored because he truly was an amazing man. Thank you.
Some years ago, probably because I had enjoyed some small success in publishing my own books, Ralph asked me if I would help him write his book. Seriously. 3 minutes into our first conversation, I had to break the news to him. Ralph, I'm sorry, I only speak English. I cannot write in the language that you're putting out in front of me. Fortunately, Ralph found someone who could be of a little more help than I. He is the renowned author of Phoenix 4, The History of the Video Game Industry, and his name is Leonard Herman. Welcome, Len.
Thank you. I first met Ralph in 1983. I was 23 years old. I was at the Consumer Electronics Show doing research on a book about Atari. And I recognized Ralph and I exclaimed, "Hey, you're Ralph Baer." And he looked at me and he goes, "Yes, so what?" And I didn't know what to do, so I just turned around with my tail between my legs and walked away. 11 years later, I wrote Phoenix, which was the world's first book about the history of video games. The book received rave reviews from the video game press, but it was self-published because publishers didn't think there was an interest in video game history at the time. Because it was self-published, it wasn't available in bookstores. Ralph heard about it, and he wrote me a letter asking how he'd get a copy of it. So I said, "Oh, it's Ralph," so I just sent him a copy of the book, never heard from him again. A year later, I published a second edition, so I sent it to Ralph, didn't hear from him. And then finally, a few months later, in the spring of 1999, he contacted me. I had sent the book to New Hampshire. He was at his winter home in Florida, so the book was waiting for him when he got back, so he invited me up here. So upon my arrival, I didn't know what to expect with this guy, but upon my arrival, I quickly learned that both he and his wife, Dina, were like the nicest people in the world. I told Dina about the first time I met Ralph and his "so what" comment, and she explained to me that it was genuine. He really didn't consider himself a big deal. At that time, I wrote for Electronic Gaming Monthly, which was the world's #1 video game magazine. When my editor found out I was coming up here, he asked me to do an article about Ralph. And later, they sent a photographer up here, and a year later, they published the article, a 7-page article, which I was told by the editor was one of the best pieces EGM ever published. By that time, it was the year 2000. Few people in the industry knew who Ralph Baer was. But my article reintroduced him to a new generation of video game executives, developers, and fans. After that, he was invited to conferences all over the world and began receiving awards, culminating in the National Medal of Technology given to him by President George W. Bush at the White House in February 2005. Ralph often told me that it was my article that paved the way to this award, and I wasn't going to argue with him. Dina once called me her surrogate son, and I in turn considered Ralph to be my surrogate father. I visited him at least once a year, and I was always in awe just being in the same room with him. Although he was in his late 80s, I felt like I was with a contemporary. And he's always so positive about everything, even in his advanced age. He didn't fear death and even joked about it. What he did fear was not being able to work in his lab. One thing that did frustrate him, though, was the Smithsonian not putting his brown box on display. He donated to them in 2004, and for 10 years it wasn't on display. Finally, in early 2014, they began setting up a display, and Ralph was very excited about it. On my last visit in June 2014, he happily showed me the plans for the display, and he couldn't wait to see it. However, 3 months later, he told me on the phone that he doubted he would live to see its grand opening the following July. It was the first time I ever heard him being negative about something, and I knew that I should soon be expecting the worst. Unfortunately, I never saw him again. My mother unexpectedly entered the hospital in October, and her prognosis was grim. Ralph was admitted to the hospital a few weeks later, and his prognosis wasn't good either. He frequently called me to ask me when I would come up here, and I kept saying I'd be there soon, but I couldn't let him know about my mother's condition. She passed away on November 24th, 2014, and while I was still mourning her, Ralph passed away 2 weeks later on December 6th. I'm still mourning him every day. Ralph Baer was a kind and brilliant man, and I'm proud and honored to be his friend. He was a true visionary. But as smart as he was wrong about one thing. He was, and always will be, a very big deal. Thank you.
We talk about this as a grassroots, independent venture, but none of this would have happened without the help and assistance of the City of Manchester through the Parks and Recreation staff. Chris Sullivan and his group have done an amazing job. If you were here this morning, you might not recognize the park. So thanks to Chris and his crew and the Mayor. When I mentioned earlier that this recognition of Ralph in other parts of the world was part of the motivation behind this project, I hope you realize I was not exaggerating. One such area where he is remembered is in Washington, D.C., as Len just mentioned. You may have heard of this place. It's called the Smithsonian. Yeah, that Smithsonian, where the basement lab from Ralph's home on Mayflower Drive has been lovingly recreated for all to see. Joining us today from the Smithsonian is a senior scholar from the National Museum of American History, Mr. David Allison. David.
Good morning. If you come to the National Museum of American History, the nation's only National History Museum, and go to the first floor, the Innovation Wing, the gateway there features Ralph Baer's home workshop, as you just heard. And I want to tell you 3 reasons why we think that's extremely appropriate. First of all, Ralph was a very successful inventor, and he invented something that everybody understands, video games. So young children, adults, they come down and they see the first version of the video game playing, and they say, "What's that? Who is this about?" And they're drawn to it immediately. But Ralph's there also because not everything he invented was successful. And he persisted, as you already heard. American inventors fail as much as they succeed, and what makes them great is that American society accepts failure and lets them go on, as they did with Ralph. Now, the second reason why Ralph's workshop is there is because it represents the workshop of every inventor everywhere. If you know somebody who's really inventive, they've got a special place. Might be in their garage, might be in their basement like his was, might be in their bedroom, but they have a place that they go to be with their ideas and come up with creativity. And this represents that not only for Ralph, but for inventors everywhere. And people that come down and go into the Innovation Wing see this and understand that. And the final reason that we think Ralph's very appropriate is because Ralph is what I say is the true all-American. And that's because he was an American by choice. And he understood better than many of us who were born here what America's all about. And he lived that life of creativity, of dedication to his family, of dedication to his community, and of dedication to his country. And in that way, he's not only a successful example of innovation, he's a successful example of being a great American. And that's why Ralph Baer is in the Smithsonian.
David. One of the great legacies that the Smithsonian Institution's interest in Ralph and his work are some of the enduring friendships that emerged from that collaboration. Thus, our next speaker has traveled here from Washington to be with us today for both professional and personal reasons. He is the founding director of the Jerome and Dorothy Lemelson Center for the Study of Invention and Innovation. Please welcome Mr. Art Malella.
Thank you, John. What an honor it is to be here, and I did count him as a dear friend. I knew him since 2001, and the friendship just grew with him. I'm going to sort of reinforce some of the comments were made about him, and I just want to talk about him as an inventive personality. In many ways, to me, he models inventors nationally and internationally. And how does he do that? He combines two things in a very interesting combination. He's a very hard-nosed guy. Those of you who know him know what he was like. He just spoke his mind. But secondly, he is a man of great imagination, which we've heard about in creativity. And inventors cannot succeed unless they have this combination of this practical aspect and this imagination. So looking at the hard-nosed part of him, I mean, here's a guy, he survived Hitler, came to this country, but at Sanders, he really understood the importance of looking at how diverse things come together. So you imagine the television serving, home television serving a different purpose. He built this secret lab in Sanders where he invented video games. He kept everything quiet until he was ready to come forward with it. And he knew how to negotiate his way around a big company like that and to succeed. And he made a lot of money for Sanders, by the way. So BA's got a lot to thank for that. But in terms of imagination, I already talked about his making these connections between video games and the TV, but also in terms of, I mean, he saw relationships between disparate things like weapons. I mean, he was in the weapons business. It was a military lab, and with toys, he put those two together. In his home lab, David just talked about our coming up here to see this wonderful home laboratory, and it was like going into a toy shop. It was just amazing. There were of course circuits all over the place, but there were just these toys that talked about his playfulness, and that's a really important characteristic of inventors. So, who are the best people to kind of to judge whether somebody's playful or not? Well, they're the kids. And when he came to the museum, we had him come down a couple of times to talk about his brown box and show some of his early games. And he was a rock star to these kids, 8-year-old kids, and he was in his mid-80s. And I remember one event, right after the event, adults are talking to him, and this 8-year-old kid comes up and grabs his arm and looks at him in awe and would not let go of his arm as he was talking to these adults. And I don't think Ralph even noticed that this kid was hanging on. It just said everything to me. So he was their buddy. And one last thing I'd like to mention, that Ralph was an artist, and he knew he was. He said this. And at the 90th birthday event, something really stuck in my mind. He said, just before the event here in Manchester happened, journalists came by, and one of the journalists said to him, well, you are 90 years old. Why are you inventing like this? Why are you doing this? And he said, insulted, he said, would you ever ask that of Picasso? To me, that says it all. Thank you.
Now you've seen that Ralph has many friends here today with us, but as much as anything else, this, for a certain special group, is a family celebration. I'm going to go out on a limb here. If your name is Baer, or if you're related to a Baer, please raise your hand. Come on, come on. Okay, I thought the top of the tent was going to come out. Welcome. We are joined by Ralph's 3 children, their spouses, and yes, some of Ralph and Dina's grandchildren are with us as well. And so it's only fitting that we hear from one of those family members. I'm not sure what the next year of my life will be like without the all hours of the day and night communication from Mark Baer's home in Salt Lake City. I'm sure Amy Chong feels the same way. But our final speaker today is a remarkable steward of his father's legacy, and his name is Mark Baer. Please welcome Mark.
You know, when they talk about public speaking, you're supposed to do it in threes, right? You tell a joke and then you go to the story. But this is no joke. I think we have to give Amy Chom a round of applause for putting this tent up today. I mean, seriously, that was incredible. There's many people to thank. I did thank them in a little private gathering we had before, but it bears repeating. And if I do miss somebody, please excuse me. But the Hitchcocks, Jeremy and Liz Hitchcock, and Amy, who I just referred to, this wouldn't have happened without them. They really were the brick and mortar, no pun intended, behind this particular project coming to fruition. And obviously without John. John's a real big ideas guy. Just to give you a short idea, I thought, let's put a plaque up. Let's put the Ralph plaque up. So when I come back into town, and even though I live out west, I spend a significant amount of time here, and I'll get to that in a minute. I can just rub it and say, hey Dad, how are you doing? And we go. And John really said, there's this bench in Boston. Red Auerbach sits on it with his cigar. Let's get Ralph with his brown box. And that idea was spawned from there, and the Hitchcocks and BAE, who we owe a deep gratitude to, they sponsored, and were heavy and early sponsors to this. We owe them a big thank you. So, Kate Aiken, who's here, I mentioned her before. She was original, had Amy's job before she went back to school full time at the University of New Hampshire. So, honestly, for those people, for Kate and Amy, John, and the Hitchcocks, if we could just get a little round of applause, because none of this would have happened without. I just coincidentally had the same last name, so that's why I'm here. And that's pretty much it. So that's the first thing I want to do is to thank. The second one was to just mention about Ralph, just to make sure it's clear. Dad was a very unique amalgamation of skills. Most people are very artistic. From a traditional sense, they can write, they can draw, they can think outside the box, or they have prowess. He was able to combine those two skill sets. That's really what set him apart and made him unique. Now, there are other people like that, and I'll get to that in a minute. And somebody do this to get me out here. I know it's raining, but at least we have the tent. But he had that ability to combine technical prowess with artistic work. And he did that all the way back from when he was a kid in Germany, all the way up to within days of his passing. And it's a very unique skill set, and I think that's what we're here to celebrate. It was that ability that gave him on the 1st of September 1966 in New York City, while waiting for a bus on a bench, he wrote down what he called eventually, and other people called the Magna Carta of video games, because people had played electronic games before him. Of course, Ben Franklin had a kite, for crying out loud, and people had played games before him. The cavemen were rolling stones. So he didn't invent games, he didn't invent electricity, he didn't invent electronic games. But what he did is he had that artistic and creative ability to bring together the fact that he had a television that was underutilized and it needed to be used. And it was from that idea that spawned the original, and you can Google Ralph Baer and Bill Harrison on TV, and it's up at the mill at the museum, which you should go to after this. In any event, it's on a loop. It will show you from 1969, a black and white movie, first ever recording of anybody playing what we now know as video games. So he was clearly first. He was the man who brought this all to us. And so now is the time for the third part of my speech, which is this is a unique town. For all the reasons you've heard before, I won't repeat it, but he had to escape barely with his life and his family from Germany in 1938, a couple months before Kristallnacht. So if he didn't get out, he probably wasn't getting out. He could have settled anywhere. He ended up settling here in Manchester, Hillsborough County, southern New Hampshire, the United States. This place was an amazing home for him and our mom, Dina, and amazing place for us to grow up as kids. All three of us kids. My sister Nancy's here somewhere, right there, and she can say something if she likes. My brother Jim's here. He's the geek. He got the gene. So he probably won't be speaking, and if he does, you won't understand what he says. You'll understand what I said because I can't speak that language. Anyway, I think it was a very unique place to grow up, a wonderful place. It gave us this opportunity. So I did want to take this one opportunity. We have set up the Ralph H. and Dina W. Baer Fund. through the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. And you can just go to the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation and put in Ralph Baer, Dina Baer. It will pull up. You can also go to give.newhampshirecf.nhcf.org/Baer scholarships. And the idea here is, and you heard Art talk about how the little kid was hanging on his arm. Ralph always wanted to pass this on, to move it forward. He knew a great city, county, state, and country was great for innovation and smarts, and he wanted to pay it forward. He did it in his own lifetime. So we started this scholarship for a student at Central High, and or students, depending upon how big it gets. So if anybody wants to help with that, we want to pass this forward, because this is started off as a Ralph tribute, and due to John's and Hitchcock's efforts, it became much more than that. And I hope it to stay much more of that for now and for time. I think we should all take a moment just to thank our lucky stars that we were born when we were born and where we were born. So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate this. And I think we're going to do the unveiling. Is that what we're going to do? So, hold on. Before we pick it up, Nancy, you want to come on up? And Jim, this is, we were going to actually unveil it, and then we found out that if we did it, we could hurt ourselves. So we hired out, but we'll have the symbolic fingers on it. Do you want to come on up, Jim? Where's Jim? Come on up. Okay, here we go. Let's move it out. Yeah, people will be sitting in there. You can see it goes in right. Thank you. Thank you. I was trying to do that. Oh, were you? Oh, I thought you were telling me. No, thank you.
We thank you for joining us here today for the unveiling of the Ralph Baer bench in Statue Plaza. If you would like, the Milliard Museum is open, and you can see a display of Ralph's work and many of his awards. But for the group, I want to say thank you all for the incredible community support, and feel free to sit down and take a selfie with Ralph. Thank you.